You've felt it building for months now, maybe years. That quiet recognition that your niceness has stopped serving you. It hasn't protected your peace. It hasn't earned you the consideration you thought it would. What it's done instead is train people to expect your compliance. It's taught them that your boundaries are negotiable. And somewhere along the way, being accommodating stopped feeling like kindness and started feeling like erosion. The version of yourself you carry around privately, the one who speaks clearly and moves without hesitation, that version keeps getting stronger in your mind while remaining invisible in your life. You rehearse conversations where you hold firm. You imagine moments where you walk away without justification. You picture yourself operating with the kind of self-regard that doesn't beg for validation. But when the actual moment arrives, when reality demands that you act on what you've been rehearsing, something stops you cold. There's a threshold most people see clearly but refuse to cross. It's the space between knowing what you should do and actually doing it, between understanding your worth and demonstrating it, between mental preparation and visible action. You stand at that threshold repeatedly, feeling the pull forward and the grip of fear pulling you back. And every time you retreat, every time you choose the familiar discomfort over the unknown strength, a piece of your self-respect quietly dies. Machiavelli spent his life observing power, not because he worshipped it, but because he understood something most people refuse to accept. The world doesn't reward good intentions. It doesn't give authority to those who wait patiently for permission. Power belongs to people who see reality without the comforting filter of how things should be, who understand that strategic thinking isn't manipulation, it's survival, who recognize that protecting yourself isn't cruelty, it's sanity. This isn't about becoming heartless, it's about becoming clear, about crossing the threshold you've been avoiding, about stepping into the identity that's been forming in your thoughts but hasn't yet materialized in your actions, about becoming the person you're secretly afraid to become because you know that once you do, there's no returning to who you used to be. Before we continue, put this statement in the comments. I choose myself first. You've already won arguments that never took place. You've delivered perfect responses to situations that only existed in your head. You've set boundaries with absolute clarity and watched people respect them, all within the safety of your imagination. Your mind has become a theater where you practice strength constantly, where you rehearse the version of yourself that doesn't bend under pressure, that doesn't apologize for having standards, that moves through life with the kind of certainty that makes others adjust to you instead of the reverse. But there's a gap, a canyon, really, between the mental rehearsal and the actual performance, between the person you are in your thoughts and the person you show the world. In your mind, you've already made the transformation. You've already become direct, boundaried, self-respecting. You know exactly what that person looks like because you've built them scenario by scenario, conversation by conversation. But you haven't made them real. When the moment comes to embody what you've practiced, you hesitate. You soften your words. You add qualifiers and explanations. You make yourself smaller to fit into the space people have assigned you. The strength you rehearsed stays locked in your mind, while your actions remain safely predictable. And this creates a specific kind of suffering, the pain of knowing you're capable of more while actively choosing less. Your mind isn't confused about what needs to happen. It's already crossed the line. It's already operating from a place of self-regard and strategic thinking. Your body just hasn't followed. Your actions haven't caught up to your awareness. And the longer that gap exists, the more you reinforce a painful pattern. You tell yourself you're preparing when you're actually just postponing. You convince yourself you need more time when what you actually need is one moment of courage. The shift from mental strength to demonstrated strength isn't as far as it feels. It's not a journey. It's a decision. One action that matches the clarity in your thoughts. One moment where you speak the truth you've been rehearsing. One boundary you set without softening it. One situation where you walk away instead of explaining yourself into exhaustion. That single visible action changes everything because it proves to you that the person you've been building mentally can exist in reality. Stop waiting for the feeling of readiness. That feeling doesn't arrive before action. It arrives after it. You make the move, and confidence follows. You demonstrate the boundary, and conviction builds. You become the person through action, not through additional preparation. There are people in your life who need you to remain exactly as you are. Not because they love you so deeply, they can't imagine you differently. Because your current patterns serve them. Your availability benefits them. Your flexibility makes their life easier. Your tendency to accommodate creates space for them to be demanding. They've built their comfort on your compliance, and they're not consciously plotting against you, but unconsciously they've become invested in you staying manageable. Think about the dynamics in your life. The person who contacts you only when they need something. They rely on you being responsive. The one who makes decisions for you. They depend on you doubting yourself. The one who talks over you or dismisses your input. They benefit from you not trusting your own voice. These patterns exist because you've allowed them to exist. And the moment you stop allowing them, the moment you start operating from a place of self-regard, the entire structure shifts. When you begin to change, when you start choosing yourself and setting clear boundaries and refusing to accommodate at your own expense, the people benefiting from the old arrangement will feel uncomfortable. Not because you're doing anything to them, but because their comfort was built on your smallness. Your growth doesn't hurt them, but it does require them to adjust. And most people resist adjustment with everything they have. Machiavelli watched this pattern play out in political structures, but it's the same in personal relationships. Power structures, whether in kingdoms or in your daily life, depend on people staying in assigned roles. When someone breaks pattern, when someone steps out of the position that was making everyone else comfortable, the system has to reorganize. And reorganization is uncomfortable. This is the moment most people retreat. They start to change, they feel the resistance, and they interpret that resistance as evidence they're doing something wrong. They wonder if they're being selfish, if they're asking for too much, if they should just go back to being easy and flexible and accommodating. But that interpretation is the trap. You're not afraid of change. You're afraid of how other people will react to your change. You're afraid of conflict, of being misunderstood, of being labeled as difficult or different. That fear makes sense because those things are genuinely uncomfortable. Being challenged hurts. Having people question your transformation or accuse you of changing feels like rejection. But here's what you need to understand with absolute clarity. Staying small to avoid other people's discomfort is choosing their peace over your life. Every time you shrink back down to keep things smooth, you lose a piece of yourself. And eventually, there's nothing left. Your growth is going to cost something. It costs the version of relationships built on you being less than you are. It costs the approval of people who only appreciated you because you didn't challenge them. It costs the easy comfort of being predictable. But what you gain is the only thing that actually matters. You gain yourself, the version that's been suffocating under the weight of everyone else's expectations. If you're hesitating because you're worried about how people will respond to your transformation, recognize that their discomfort isn't your responsibility. Their adjustment is their work. Your growth is yours. Put this in the comments. My growth matters most. You can study power for years. You can read every book, absorb every principle, understand every strategy. You can build internal clarity until you know exactly who you are and what you deserve. But none of that matters if it stays invisible, because power doesn't exist in your mind. It exists in what people can see, in what you demonstrate, in the actions you take that make your position undeniable. Machiavelli didn't write about theory. He wrote about reality, about moves that people witnessed, about actions that shifted dynamics. Because he understood that if your power isn't visible, if people can't see it in how you operate, then you don't have it. You just have thoughts about it. This is where people get stuck indefinitely. They build courage internally. They do the mental work. They achieve clarity about what they want and what they won't tolerate. But when the moment arrives to demonstrate that clarity, they wait. They tell themselves it's not quite the right time. They convince themselves one more day of preparation will make the difference. And months turn into years. Same place, same patterns, same frustration. The shift happens with one visible move. Not a complete transformation, not 10 different changes. One action that makes your new position undeniable. One boundary you state without softening the language. One moment where you choose yourself in front of other people. One time you walk away without justifying your decision. One instance where you let the discomfort sit instead of rushing to fix it. That first visible move changes everything because it removes your ability to pretend. Once you've demonstrated your boundary, once people have witnessed you choosing yourself, you can't take it back. You can't undo it. You can't return to being the version who would have stayed silent. The message is sent. To them, but more importantly, to yourself. This is precisely why hesitation feels safer. Because as long as you don't make the visible move, you can still retreat. You can stay in the comfortable middle ground where you have clarity but haven't committed to it. But once you step into your power publicly, once you make the move where people can see it, there's no reverse. And that feels terrifying because it means full commitment. No more half in, half out. No more testing while keeping an exit available. But it's also the most liberating thing you'll ever do. Because the fear you've been carrying isn't about the action itself. It's about the uncertainty of whether you'll actually follow through. The moment you make the move, that uncertainty evaporates. You've done it. It's real. And suddenly the thing you were afraid of becomes the thing you've already accomplished. The first move is the hardest. Every part of you will scream warnings. Your heart will race. Your mind will flood with worst-case scenarios. Every instinct trained into you will push you back toward safety. But you push through anyway, because the first move breaks the pattern. The second move is easier. By the third or fourth, it starts to feel natural. And you realize the person you were afraid to become isn't dangerous at all. They're just someone who finally values themselves. Stop waiting for perfect conditions. The conditions will never be perfect. You make the move, then you figure out how to hold the position. You set the boundary, then you learn to maintain it. You walk away, then you learn to stand in the space that creates. You speak your truth, then you learn to handle whatever reaction comes. Machiavelli understood this. Action creates capability, not the other way around. What's the one thing you've been avoiding because making it visible would lock in your transformation? Do that thing. Today. Do it afraid, but do it. Here's where many people create a false obstacle. They look at the idea of becoming more assertive, more direct, more self-protective, and they equate it with becoming cruel. They think strength means coldness. They believe having boundaries requires hardness. And because they don't want to be cruel or cold or hard, they stay weak. They stay accommodating. That's a lie you were taught to keep you manageable. Strength and cruelty are not the same thing. Boundaries and heartlessness are not connected. You can be kind and still protect yourself. You can care deeply about people and still refuse to be drained by them. You can respect someone and still remove them from your life if the dynamic is destroying you. Machiavelli had a reputation. People called him ruthless. They said he taught deception and manipulation. But here's what gets lost in the surface reading. Machiavelli wasn't teaching cruelty. He was teaching clarity. He was teaching people to separate emotion from decision-making, to act based on what's necessary rather than what feels comfortable in the moment. That's not heartlessness. That's strategic thinking. Think about a situation where someone continuously crosses your boundaries. They take your time without asking. They dismiss your needs. They expect your energy to be available whenever they want it. If you're operating purely from emotion, you'll either explode in anger or swallow the frustration and build resentment. Either way, emotion is controlling your decision. But if you're operating from strength, you address it calmly. You state the boundary clearly. You make a decision based on what protects your peace, not based on what maintains their comfort. That's not cruel. That's self-respect. Here's where the confusion compounds. When you stop allowing people to take advantage of you, some of them will call you cold. When you stop explaining and justifying every decision, they'll say you've changed. When you start choosing yourself instead of defaulting to everyone else's needs, they'll accuse you of being selfish. But that accusation isn't truth. It's discomfort speaking. It's their reaction to losing the version of you that served them. You were trained incorrectly. You were taught that being firm means being unkind, that having standards means being harsh, that protecting yourself means being selfish. But those equations were designed to make you easy to manage. They were never about truth. Real strength understands the difference between being harsh and being clear, between being mean and being honest, between cruelty and self-protection. Machiavelli said a leader must inspire both respect and caution. And if you can only have one, respect built on clear boundaries is more reliable than affection built on compliance. People misread that as advocating for tyranny, but he's saying something simpler. Don't let your need to be liked make you weak. Not everyone deserves access to you. Your time is valuable. Your energy is finite. Your attention is a gift. Your mental space is sacred. And you get to decide who receives those things. That's not selfish. That's basic self-regard. If someone drains you, you're allowed to create distance. If someone disrespects you repeatedly, you're allowed to remove them entirely. Doing that doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you someone who understands that protecting your peace isn't optional. The fear is that if you start setting real boundaries, if you start being selective about where your energy goes, you'll lose your warmth. You'll become someone you don't recognize. But that's not what happens. What actually happens is you become more authentic. When you're not constantly bending to keep everyone else comfortable, you have space to show up as yourself. You can be generous with people who deserve it because you're not exhausted from giving to people who don't. Strength and kindness aren't opposites. They work together. You can be warm and still have limits. You can be caring and still protect yourself. You can be generous and still selective. Stop confusing firmness with cruelty. Being strong doesn't mean shutting your heart down. It means using your heart wisely, giving it to people and situations that honor it. Put this in the comments. Strength protects my peace. When you step into your power, when you start choosing yourself and setting real boundaries and operating from self-regard, you will lose something specific. You'll lose a version of affection that only existed when you stayed small. Some people in your life care about you, but they care about the version of you that doesn't challenge them, the version that accommodates their needs, the version that stays predictable and manageable. When you stop being that version, their affection shifts. Sometimes it fades completely. And it's confusing because you didn't do anything to them. You didn't attack them or betray them. You just grew. You just started valuing yourself. But to them, that growth feels threatening because the entire dynamic was built on you staying in a specific role. When you step out of that role, the structure they were comfortable with collapses. And instead of adjusting, many of them will pull away. Machiavelli observed this constantly. He watched people claim power and immediately lose allies. Not because they became terrible people, but because they stopped pretending. The same thing happens in your life, just more quietly. The person who felt important because you needed them constantly loses that role when you become self-sufficient. The person who felt superior when you doubted yourself loses that position when you trust your own judgment. And when they lose what they were getting from the dynamic, they leave. This is the cost Machiavelli talked about. You cannot gain power without losing comfort. And what you lose first is the approval of people who needed you to stay down. This is painful. Even when you know the dynamic was unhealthy, even when you recognize the affection was conditional, you'll miss it. You'll miss the familiarity, the easy connection. There will be moments when you question whether the transformation was worth it. But here's what you need to understand with absolute clarity. Affection that requires you to stay small isn't real support. Real support adjusts when you grow. Real support celebrates your transformation, even when it creates discomfort. Real support might struggle with the change, but it doesn't punish you for it. If someone only showed you warmth when you were easy to manage, that wasn't genuine care. That was convenience. And losing convenience hurts. But it's not the same as losing something real. Machiavelli accepted this cost early. He knew that stepping into power meant stepping away from certain comforts. And he made that choice anyway. Not because he didn't value connection, but because he valued truth more. That's the choice in front of you right now. You can keep the version of affection that requires you to remain the same. Or you can step into your power and see what remains. See who adjusts. See who stays. Yes, some people will leave. That's the reality. And it will hurt. But the people who stay, those connections become stronger because they're built on who you actually are, not on who you were pretending to be to keep everyone comfortable. And the new people who enter your life after your transformation, they'll meet the real you from the beginning. No performance, no mask. That's the exchange. You lose shallow affection built on your compliance, and you gain real respect built on your authenticity. The transition is difficult. There's a gap between losing the old connections and building the new ones. A space where you feel isolated. But that gap doesn't last forever. And on the other side, you find something better. People who appreciate your strength, not just your flexibility. People who respect your boundaries instead of testing them. And most importantly, you find yourself. The version that's been suffocating under years of accommodation. Put this in the comments. Real support celebrates growth. Real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't prove anything. It doesn't react to every provocation. It simply exists. And one of the clearest signs that you've stepped into genuine power is this shift. You stop reacting to everything and start selecting where your energy goes. You become deliberate instead of automatic. Most people live in reaction mode. Something happens, they respond immediately. Someone says something critical, they defend instantly. A situation appears, they engage automatically. It's reflexive. But powerful people operate differently. They pause. They observe. They decide whether something deserves their energy before they give it. Machiavelli watched leaders exhaust themselves trying to address every criticism, every rumor, every challenge. But the leaders who endured, who maintained their position over time, were selective. They knew which battles mattered and which were just noise. That's the shift you need to internalize. Stop treating every comment, every situation, every provocation like it deserves equal weight. Because it doesn't. Some things deserve your full attention. Some things warrant a response. But most things deserve nothing. Not because you're being dismissive, but because engaging doesn't serve you. Someone criticizes you with the clear intention of getting under your skin. The old version of you would react immediately, defend, explain, prove them wrong. But the powerful version pauses and asks a simple question. Does this person's opinion actually matter? Is engaging with this worth my energy? Most of the time, the answer is no. So you don't respond, not from fear, not because you can't, but because you choose not to. That silence is power. When you don't react, you stay in control. You don't hand your peace to someone else. You observe, assess, and select. This applies to everything. Situations you don't want to be part of. Conversations that don't serve you. Drama that has nothing to do with you. You start filtering. You start asking whether something aligns with who you're becoming. Whether it adds value, or whether it's just noise. And when it's noise, you let it pass without engaging. Machiavelli said powerful people combine the strength of the lion with the cunning of the fox. They have the capacity to engage forcefully when necessary, and the intelligence to stay silent when engagement serves no purpose. When you start living this way, people notice. They notice you're not as easy to provoke, that you don't get pulled into every argument. Some will respect that shift, but others will test you harder. They'll push your buttons deliberately to see if you'll break, and that's when you really prove the transformation. Because staying calm when someone is actively trying to provoke you, that's next-level power. You don't explain yourself. You don't justify your silence. You just hold your position and let them exhaust themselves. Eventually, they stop, because there's no reward. That's when you know you've made the shift, when you're no longer controlled by external triggers, when your energy is yours to give, not theirs to take. This doesn't mean you become cold. It doesn't mean you stop engaging with life. It means you stop engaging with what doesn't matter. You save your energy for what does. You engage deeply with people and situations that deserve it, and you let everything else fade into the background without guilt. That's the filter. And once you establish it, your life gets quieter. Not because there's less happening, but because you're no longer giving attention to noise. Everything we've discussed, the mental rehearsals, the resistance from others, the visible moves, the difference between strength and cruelty, the loss of conditional affection, the shift to selective engagement, all of it comes down to one final piece. Decision. The decision to become the person you're afraid to become. Because here's the truth that cuts through everything else. Fear only survives in indecision. As long as you're halfway in and halfway out, as long as you're considering transformation but not committing to it, the fear will keep growing. It will show you worst-case scenarios every day. It will remind you of everything you might lose. It will keep you paralyzed in the gap between who you are and who you could be. And that gap is where anxiety lives, where self-doubt thrives. Because you're not fully one person or the other. You're suspended in between, and that's the hardest place to exist. Machiavelli understood this completely. He valued decisive identity. He said half measures fail because they leave you vulnerable. You can't be both the person who accommodates and the person who sets boundaries. You can't be both the version that seeks approval and the version that trusts yourself. You have to choose. And the moment you commit fully, the moment you decide completely, the fear dissolves. Not because the risk disappears, but because the uncertainty does. You're no longer wondering if you'll do it. You've done it. You're no longer debating whether you're capable. You've committed. And once you're fully in, once you've made the complete decision, something shifts internally. You stop fighting yourself. You stop going back and forth. You become calm, clear, focused, because you're not split anymore. You're whole. This is what people misunderstand about fear. They think the fear is about outcomes, about what might happen if they change. But the fear isn't about the outcome. It's about the decision, about the moment you stop considering and start committing. When you stop testing the edge and just step forward. That moment is intense because it's final. But it's also freeing because once you make it, you don't have to keep making it. You've decided. Now you just execute. Machiavelli said it's better to act boldly and fail than to live timidly and wonder. Because even if you step into your power and things don't go perfectly, you'll have the answer. You'll know. But if you stay stuck in indecision, you'll never know. You'll just wonder. And that wondering will follow you for the rest of your life. So here's what you need to do. Stop the halfway approach. Stop testing. Commit fully. Decide that you're becoming the person you're afraid to become, and then act like it. Set the boundary. Make the move. Walk away. Speak up. Choose yourself. Do it once. Do it completely. And don't look back. Because the moment you commit fully, the fear loses its power. The uncertainty disappears, and the person you were afraid to become, they're just you now. And once you're living as that person, you'll realize it wasn't as frightening as you thought. The consequences weren't as severe as you imagined. The loss wasn't as devastating as the fear suggested. What you find instead is clarity, peace, self-respect. Put this in the comments. I commit fully now. You're afraid because becoming that person ends negotiation. No more second chances for things that don't deserve them. No more explaining yourself endlessly to people who don't listen. No more shrinking to make others comfortable. The person you're afraid to become is the one who finally chooses himself without apology. And once you make that choice, there's no reversing it. There's no returning to the version who stayed quiet. That door closes. And it should, because on the other side is the version of you that's been waiting. The one who doesn't apologize for existing. The one who moves with intention instead of fear. The one who understands that real power isn't about controlling others. It's about refusing to be controlled. Machiavelli didn't write about evil. He wrote about reality, about seeing the world without the comforting lies most people use to avoid discomfort. And the reality is this: you've been playing small because it felt safe. But it's not protecting you anymore. It's limiting you. And somewhere deep inside, you know that. That's why you're here. That's why this message resonates. That's why the fear feels so overwhelming. Because you're close. You're standing at the threshold, and all you have to do is step across it. So step. Become the person you're afraid to become. Not because they're perfect, not because they have everything figured out, but because they choose themselves. And that choice changes everything. If this resonated, hit the like button now. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, because we're only going deeper from here. Drop your affirmation in the comments and tell me which part hit hardest. You've got this. Now go prove it.